So if I have like a list of cheaps, and so we add a new cheap into the list, it'll just automatically show up in the UI?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're actually going to go into a short demo about this. In a little bit. We already
In 1 second, after this next slide.
Yeah, this slide basically goes over the other frameworks that are out there. React actually calls itself technically a library.
Yeah, I think they just call itself the Vue, the V.
Yeah, they call themselves the V in MVC. But I threw it in here because it's really up and coming. It's really, really cool. It's much more performant than the other frameworks out there, specifically because it only tries to do one thing, and it tries to do that one thing well. Ember tries to emulate, I think, more of like I would say more Ruby-like in what it wants to do, or more Ruby on Rails-like in what it tries to do in terms of syntax and structure. And yeah.
I've actually never used Ember myself. I've used Backbone. I think that was the last one on the list. And
yeah.
that one's a little bit lighter. It's a little bit more bare bones. It actually doesn't have data binding. You have to like add other libraries to do that. So if you like more minimalistic, less opinion, Backbone's pretty good. I've used that even with WinJS and put those two together, and it worked pretty well. So.
Yeah, and I think actually I've used Angular with WinJS as well, and that also worked quite well. Since these are all JavaScript files that you can essentially include in, a lot of times they will work pretty much out of the box or with minor changes.
Yep.
So to summarize, React is great if you want something that's highly performant and very lightweight, and you only want to manipulate the views. Backbone is great if you want a little bit more MVC structure, but you still want to keep things lightweight. And Ember is great if you're already a Ruby on Rails user, and if you like that sort of framework. Angular, though, I think is only one still with two-way data binding, which is quite nice.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. Yeah, I don't actually remember. So.
Yeah, I think the other ones have one-way data binding. Which means it'll get something from your control. If you change something in the controller, it'll change it in your view. But what's actually nice about two-way data binding is that if you change something in your view, it'll automatically change that in your controller as well.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Inception.
So let's actually go and look at that. We'll go into our module 2 and open Hello World.
Beautiful.
So as you can see here, right now we have just a really, really plain page, and it says hello. And I'm actually going to open the developer console here so you could see what is happening in the DOM. So as you can see here, we are saying, hey, make this app an Angular app just by putting ng app on top. And what we're actually saying is, hey, use this text box here as the input. So we're going to give this ng model. We're going to call this ng model input text, and that basically starts that data binding process by saying, hey, this is the data that we're going to share. And so now when we bind, this doesn't exactly show up here.
So the live DOM, Helen,
yeah.
I think you're expecting the brackets, right?
I am expecting the brackets. You're right. I'm going to go
into
here.
Yeah, there you go.
And you'll see that we put actually input text here. So we're saying, hey, this model here, this input is going to be what our input text is, and we're going to call, and that's our model. And now with the binding, it's actually going to bind this to wherever we put this input text in brackets here. So now whenever we change something in this input, it'll actually change automatically here where we want it to be displayed.
Okay, so it's like magic. It's basically Angular looks at those brackets and says, oh, I have this spot of data that I need to fill in, and it binds to this thing called input text.
Yeah, it'll bind to whatever model you're given. So we're going to use this much later on to do a bit more complex things. And you'll notice that I talked a lot about controllers, but we don't actually have a controller here. You can actually bind this with all your logic not on the same page as well. I think that actually makes it look much more impressive than right here when we're saying, oh yeah, you put the input text here, and then you're basically getting the input text.
Yeah, it looks like magic, really. One quick question: can we do this in Visual Studio? Can we do this in any text editor? Like what's required here?
Yeah, so right now we're using Sublime Text just as a really, really lightweight text editor, but you can absolutely use Visual Studio or anything else as well. We're using Sublime Text primarily because that's the
It's cross-platform.
Yeah, it's cross-platform, and a lot of web developers really enjoy using it. So we thought we'd use the tools that other people use for things like JavaScript frameworks, basically.
Yeah, but really it's just opening a directory. So
yeah, exactly.
It's about the same thing as anything else.
Yeah. When you're actually opening something in a straight text file like this, and you're seeing that you can make changes just straight in this text file, I think it really shows that everything we're doing is basically straight JavaScript and not that complex.
Yep.
So now that we've done a tiny hello world, let's actually go through and talk about exactly what we did. And the first thing that we'll talk about are directives. So directives are those Angular-only HTML attributes that we add into our application. You could see from if you think back to our hello world, when we called ng app or when we called something an ng model, those are basically directives. You put them in your HTML tag just to denote that, hey, this is going to be an Angular. This is going to be an element that we're going to use with Angular. And it'll attach some specific behavior to the element. So for example, when we said ng app for the entire, to the HTML tag that's saying, hey, this entire page is going to be an Angular application. And when we set ng model to that text field again, you're saying, hey, this text field is going to be an Angular data model. And you can tell something is an Angular directive by the prefix that it has, which will usually be ng dash or data dash ng dash, or actually data dash ng colon is, I think, what it usually is.
Yeah.
So if you look in Source Code for a lot of your favorite websites, you'll probably see something like this already.
Well, data dash is the common attribute if any type of JavaScript or any type of library wants to add data to the DOM. Or wants to denote or say something about that particular element in the DOM. And it doesn't just work for Angular, it works for a lot of other frameworks use data dash as well.
Yeah. This is, it's just a nice, so that's why there are two formats. There's the ng dash, to keep it simple, and then there's the data dash ng, which is sort of the more universal model that's out there. The directives in Angular are actually one of its key features, because there are so many directives that you can use, and it makes it so easy to just denote that this is an Angular element instead of, for example, in jQuery or whatever else. You have to actually go in your JavaScript and say, hey, I want to do something to this element.